How's it going?
Good.
So, what are you working on?
I'm working on questioning.
Okay, you're working on questioning. And how is that going?
Okay.
What do you mean by okay?
Well, it's going okay. It's going okay because when we were talking about it, it's really easy for me to get questions in the beginning of a story before you read it, but during and after, it's a little challenging.
Okay, so you feel that, we talked about this before, that questioning before you read is very easily, but we're really working on questioning while we're reading and after we're reading, okay? So, what stumbling blocks or what's kind of holding you up for questioning while you're reading?
Sometimes stopping to find questions or looking for questions.
So when you're talking about finding questions and looking for questions, what do you mean by that?
Well, for finding questions is when you're reading and just get confused and just skip over it, or you just actually kind of see what it means.
Okay, so you have some questions written down here, or a question written down here, and read the question that you have.
How did she feel when her first book was published?
Okay, so that was a question that you asked while you were reading? Okay, so when you were reading that section of the book, were you wondering how she was feeling? Or did the author in the story ever tell you that?
Well, he said she was excited, but that was the only thing she said, and I was wondering how she felt while it was being published, like if she was nervous or
Okay, right? Or something else, because the process wasn't completed, but they gave one example of how she felt. Okay, so that was while you were reading. How is questioning going after you're reading?
I like this part going after.
Yeah, so you said that after you read, you're having trouble coming up with questions. Okay, so do you have any questions about, like, after you read?
Well, maybe, because after you read, do you go back in the story and look for the questions, or do you just try to come up with them?
Well, that's a good question. What do you think?
I don't know, I guess you could do either.
You could do either. But what do you think would help you understand the story more?
Go back and try to find it? Or no? Maybe try to think about the story and then find questions that you think would kind of benefit what you're looking for.
Or what the story is about. So thinking ahead of what the story is, what's going to happen in the story. So like when you're watching a movie, do you ever wonder during certain scenes what's going to happen next if they switch to a different part of the story when they're in the movie? Like if you're, because we haven't seen very many movies together, so it's kind of hard to come up with anything. But think about a movie that you've watched in the past, and you're sitting there questioning, or you've seen the Harry Potter movies, right? So at the end of the very first movie, knowing that there were other books to be made, did you ever question what the other movies might be like? Okay, so it's similar to that type of questioning. Like, you could question about the character, what's going to happen to the character, or their feelings about something. You can also question about, if there are other things that are going on in the book. You can question how, like if a relationship is going on, if they're having one between her and her publisher, what that might continue to look like. So the question you had was, how does she feel about her book being published? You could also question, how is the publisher treating her? Or how is her family going to respond to her having a book being published? So those are other questions that you can ask that can relate to more than one question. So those would be questions that you could ask after as well. You could ask, and a lot of times people ask questions that are like predicting questions of what's going to happen next after they're done reading. So in the book, where are you in the book? So let's think of a question. Let's think of a question that you could ask. We'll try to formulate a question that you could ask before you read next time. Okay. So tell me what's going on in the story a little bit toward before chapter 10. What's going on like these last several pages, like from here?
Well, in these pages, she's getting a lot of books published.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of pictures of books in here that she's had or made, saying what some of them are about, or little sections from them.
Okay. So what question could you have about those different books that she has been publishing?
Why did she publish these ones in here too? And I read about them. Why did she make all three of them about this guy who found this boy who found the dog?
Okay, so you want to know the thinking behind why she came up with this series of Shiloh. Okay, so that would be a question that we could write down on a page somewhere in your book. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Okay, so let's write that question here, right there, about why did she, my pencil is wet. So you want to know why she wrote a series called Shiloh. Because in this book she talks a lot about how she comes up with her other books, right? But she doesn't talk about this one yet.
Okay, so why did she
Write the series Shiloh. Because all her previous books have been just one book, right? And this one is a series, and you want to know why she switched her mind to write a series? Okay. Okay, there you go. So you can write this as after. Remember how I asked you to put an A for after and D for during, so you know if it's during or before or after? There you go. Okay. Thank you. Good job.